Hey everyone, my name is Matt and welcome to episode 11 of my Ask Matt series where we discuss topics just about you, the viewer. Now today we're going to be talking about sawing up logs to achieve a grain pattern that you want, or to achieve different grain patterns in the log as you're sawing them. Now this topic came up as I was posting about sawing up this log here, because I had mentioned that I was sawing this thing so that I had riffs on stock for leg blanks. So I thought we'd first talk about how I cut this log here, and then we'll go into the shop and I'll cut up another log and we'll see a few more examples of ways you can cut logs to achieve different grain patterns. Now on this log, I was trying to get some nice 16-quarter stock or 4-inch thick stock for possibly table legs or something like that. And I wanted some stock that was going to be riffs on, which is when the grain is going to be running diagonally across a leg blank. So this one down here, this slab, this is the first one that I cut, and I aim to have my cut so that I would have 2 leg blanks on each side of a flat sawn area. So if I drop a line down here, you can see that that would be 1 leg blank there, and then there'd be another leg blank there. And in both cases here, the grain is going to be running diagonally, which would give you a look of straight grain on all 4 sides of that leg. Now the next slab off of here, this one's going to be a little more quarter sawn and riff sawn kind of combined. You can see this top face here is going to be more quarter sawn. The grain is running pretty much vertically here, but as it comes down here, the grain kind of scoops and comes to more of an angle. That's going to be more riff sawn. And then the next cut here, this one here contained most of the pith. So I got some of the pith down here, but then on the other end of the log, the pith is more in this center one here. So this was pretty much a waste board. And I'll also mention that this log I had laying around for a few years before I cut it, so it was pretty heavily checked. So a lot of the cuts that I was making was trying to get the saw blade to be basically right in that cut, or right in that crack, to eliminate that from the log anyway. So this was a piece of 8-quarter, which would give me some pretty much quarter sawn material on the left and right of the pith, which is still usable, and the rest is kind of all cracked, and it's going to have the pith in it. And the pith is the center of the tree, and that's going to crack pretty much no matter what. So any boards that you leave with the pith in it, they're going to end up cracking pretty much the whole length of the entire board. Now the next cut I made here was some more riff sawn material. This is pretty much just like this one down here, and the top one here is going to be more plain sawn, and I just cut that because that was all that was left of this log at the time. Now a question I've been asked a lot is if I actually take the time to do this on all the logs I cut, and the answer to that is pretty much no. I usually just go for the most yield I can get out of the log. I make my first cut to make a flat pass, and then I just keep slabbing down until that log is gone. Now that will leave me with a slab that has a pith in it in the middle somewhere, which is fine. I know that's going to crack, which is okay too, because the stock on the left and the right of the center of that board, where that crack is going to be, is still perfectly usable. Now ideally, if you can get the cuts lined up so that the saw blade actually cuts right through the pith perfectly, that is going to be your best bet, because that's going to eliminate the pith in the kerf of the blade, and then both sides of that cut, the top slab and the bottom slab next to that pith, those are going to be just fine. So ideally, if you can do that, that's going to work out really well for you. But for me, I just don't bother with trying to get that to line up perfectly. I'm more concerned with getting that thing slabbed up and stacked and ready to dry. So let's head inside. I'll saw up a log on the bandsaw, and we can look at a few of the different grain patterns that you can achieve based on how the log is cut and where in the board you take your stock from. All right, so I grabbed a log that was sitting out back that's probably been out there for a couple of years now. So it is kind of checked a little bit just because it wasn't sealed and it was just sitting out there in the sun or whatever. But for demonstration purposes, this will still work. And one of the first things that is really kind of important when you're trying to saw up a log is to determine which way to rotate the log to give you the result that you want. And in my case, when I see something like this where I have a limb or a crotch, I like to cut my boards in line with that crotch, and that gives me that nice crotch figure in the boards, which is something that I prefer. But if you didn't want it, you could just rotate it maybe about 90 degrees or so, and that would remove that figure from the board in most cases. But I like it, so I'm going to make my cuts with it. So far what I did here is I drew on the end grain here the growth ring, so you can kind of have an idea of what the ring pattern is going to be like as we make these cuts. And the other thing I did is I took this log over to the jointer and I just squared it up real quick just to give me a nice reference surface to ride over my bandsaw table. So what I'm going to start off by doing is making a slice down here, and that'll give me a plane sawn board. And we'll take a look at that grain pattern, and I'll make a few cuts here until we get to the pith, and then I'll stop. Because as you can see here, I have this crack right here. And another thing you can really do as you're working through your logs is orient your cuts so that you incorporate the crack into the cut line or into the kerf, thereby removing that cut or that crack, and you don't have as much of a loss in your boards. And when we get over here, because this crack is pretty much perpendicular to the way I have this set up right now, I'm going to show you another way to saw up a log so that it's going to be quarter sawn stock. So let me go ahead and make a few cuts here, and I'll show you a few of the different grain patterns within those plane sawn boards and how you can get some different patterns out of those plane sawn boards. Yeah, that makes sense, right? So let me get started here. Alright, so if we take a look at the three boards I have here, we can see the three different grain orientations you can have in a board. So this top one here is pretty much plane sawn. That is when the grain is running parallel to the face of the board, and this is pretty close to it. It's got a little bit of curvature to it, but for our purposes here it's going to be plane sawn. In this board you can see two different kinds of figures, or two different kinds of grain patterns. Over here and over here, these little areas to the left and right of the center are rift sawn. You can see the grain is running a diagonal pattern to the face. And the middle area here is mostly plane sawn as well. Now if we come down to this third one here, we have pretty much all three of them. We have some areas over here which are quarter sawn towards the outsides. That is when the grain is running perpendicular to the face. So you can see the growth rings are pretty much vertical here. Through here is a little bit of rift sawn. That grain is running in a diagonal pattern. And then in the center here we have plane sawn again, which is when the rings are running parallel again to the face of the board. So what about on the face of the board? What kind of grain patterns do we have there? Well, in flat sawn, you'll have that pretty typical cathedral style pattern. So now on rift sawn stock, if I was to cut this rift sawn stock out of this board, you'll see that all four sides of this piece of wood are going to have very straight grain. And that's going to be really nice for like a table leg, for instance. Now the look on the quarter sawn boards are going to be cathedrals on one face, so the edge usually, and then the other face, which is the quarter sawn face, is going to have very straight grain. And if it is a wood that has a lot of rays in it, you're going to see that ray flex. So that's going to be really common in the oaks. You see a lot of quarter sawn white oak or red oak, and that has a lot of those nice big flecks in it. And that's the rays coming up from the center of the tree. So let me cut up a few of these samples here. We have our orientation with the markers on the end. So we'll cut these up, I'll plane them so you can kind of see a little better what the grain is going to look like when they're all finalized. Alright, so let's take a look at the examples I have here. This one here is rift sawn, and this one here is quarter sawn. And you can see that on the rift sawn blank, there is straight grain on all four sides. However, on this quarter sawn blank, there is straight grain on just two sides, and the other two faces have a cathedral or plane sawn look to them. So really, anything that's quarter sawn has one of the edges that looks plane sawn. It's just something to consider with that quarter sawn material. Now the rift sawn material is great, it's fairly stable, and it's going to be nice for some table legs or something where you want nice straight grain on all four sides. Now quarter sawn material is really great for doors because it doesn't expand and contract across its width, it just expands and contracts across its thickness. And with the thicknesses like an inch or less or something like that, that thickness is going to be pretty much negligible. The other nice thing about quarter sawn stock is it doesn't really have any predisposition for movement at all, so it's not going to twist or cup or warp on you, or at least it would have a lot less of a tendency to do that than say a piece of plain sawn stock. So that's verse sawn and that's quarter sawn stock. I'm going to take this other half of this log here and I'm going to show you how to quarter saw a log in a more, I guess, traditional sense. And in this case here, I have my crack here running vertically, so that's going to work out nicely because it's going to be able to put my crack right in the kerf, and I'll have more yield that way too because I won't have a crack in the middle of one of my boards. So let me start cutting this up, and you'll see I'll make a cut here to basically quarter this log. It's going to cut this in half, which makes 2 quarters, and then I can put a 1/4 of the log aside, and I can start making cuts, flipping the log back and forth, or flipping the quarter back and forth as I go to create quarter sawn stock, keeping this, oh, wrong side, keeping the orientation of the rings perpendicular to the face. So let me get my stuff on and we'll get going here. So there we go. That's pretty much quarter sawn. It's a little bit off because I think the size of the log is a little small for this, but that's kind of the idea, is that you're trying to keep that perpendicular grain to the face. So as you're going through and you're making those cuts, you're just flipping that log back and forth so that you're taking material off both sides, and your boards will get narrower and narrower, but you're maintaining that perpendicular orientation of the growth rings to the face. So now I have a nice batch of quarter sawn maple for something. I'll just have to let that dry for a little bit. So I hope you found this interesting and useful. It's kind of interesting when you think about like how lumber is cut to be looking the way you want it. And when you go to a store and you buy some of this quarter sawn, and you just kind of see that the face looks the way it's supposed to. It's got the flex in it and all that stuff, and it's stable, but you don't really know how it comes out of the log. Knowing how it comes out of the log is just another little fun thing to know, I guess. So if you have any topic suggestions for a future Ask Matt, please feel free to leave those down in the comments below. I appreciate any suggestions you might have. These are a lot of fun for me to make, and I really do enjoy even making the props for these things too. So if you have any suggestions, please feel free to leave those down below. As always, if you have any questions or comments about anything I talked about today or anything here in my shop, please feel free to leave me a comment about that as well. I always appreciate those, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have. And until next time, happy woodworking.